Our final panel is Kirk, Scruton, and Contemporary Conservatism. And I encourage you to look at your programs to find the full biographies of each of our speakers. We are going to proceed from my right, back here again. And with that, I would turn the floor over to Christopher Fear.
Well, thanks very much, Jeff, and thanks for thanking yourself so I don't have to. Thank you for inviting me. It's a wonderful event. Now, the full paper that I've written covers the synopsis that I've provided in the program, and I'll give you the first part of that. But because I won't have time to read all of it, I've picked out the bits that I'd hope you'd find the more interesting. So I'll give you some of what I've written about the lessons from Kirk and Scruton for contemporary British conservatism on Christian metaphysics and family property. Now, I should perhaps apologise for the fact that on a panel on the subject of contemporary Anglo-American conservatism, my paper deals only with the Anglo bit. Sorry about that. This is not because there's no such thing as a common Anglo-American conservative tradition. Anyone who believes that cannot have read Russell Kirk's wonderful essay of a little over 100 pages, America's British Culture, or listened to Dr. Nelson's paper yesterday. But I will balance my focus on Britain by attending especially to what Russell Kirk can tell us about it, though of course the full paper also discusses Roger Scruton. Chapter 11 of The Conservative Mind is titled English Conservatism Adrift, the 20th Century. It contains the 14 pages on W.H. Mallock, for whom Kirk's praise is considerable. Now, reading that chapter is today a complex experience because there are so many obvious parallels between the situation of the Conservative Party in 1906 and today. Kirk writes that in 1895, the Conservatives' position had appeared invulnerable. They'd had the support of a range of powerful interests, the old Whig landed families and the middle classes, liberal unionists and imperialistic radicals. They, quote, were the political beneficiaries of British imperial ambitions. And yet, in the general election of 1906, they were disastrously reduced to just 156 seats in the House of Commons. The really impelling causes of the disaster, Kirk says, lay deeper than the obvious and proximate. The loss of Victorian confidence, especially confidence in the political battles that had been familiar since 1832. The swelling influence of the socialists, and the end of economic progress. The Conservatives went adrift, Kirk thinks, because they lost their sense of circumstances. Is it too fanciful to suppose that Kirk's diagnosis of conservatism during the 2 decades from 1906 might apply today? Perhaps not. In 2019, the Conservative Party enjoyed another unusual electoral coalition, this time between prosperous middle-class voters in the South and Midlands of England and patriotic working-class voters in the north of England and Wales, and a large parliamentary majority. Pro-Brexit Toryism seemed pretty well entrenched. And again, the party benefited from an imperial policy, the ambition of renewing ties in trade and other matters with the old empire overseas, the United States and the Commonwealth. And yet, in 2024, the Conservatives were even more disastrously reduced to just 121 seats. They are now adrift from power in almost all of the UK's political institutions. Again, the proximate causes are easily listed. Political long COVID, a series of leadership changes, one farcical mini-budget, and the rapid advance of Reform UK, the latest vehicle of Nigel Farage's rollercoaster career. But the really impelling causes are, again, deeper. First, not so much the end of economic progress as the unpleasant novelty of a generation, the sociological Generation Y, millennials, being the first in recorded British history to be worse off than its parents, lower starting wages, student debt, the effects of qualification inflation, inaccessible mortgages. Our parents bought houses on low-interest mortgages with zero down payment in the 1970s and 80s. But most of their children, now in their 30s and 40s, do not own their own homes and cannot save up the down payments that are now required, which is usually 10% of the value of the property. This is largely why marriage and childbirth have happened so much later and so much less for our generation. If they are not politically conservative, it is because they have little to love and conserve, and are materially primed, therefore, for statist redistributivism. The second deep development is the consequent mainstreaming, not of socialism, but of a more ideologically comprehensive leftism that has absorbed the old anti-capitalism and statism and fused them with libertine private morality, oikophobia, racial favoritism, and various aspects of biopolitical transhumanism. Crucially, progressive morality disparages people of ability and talent. It believes that self-reliance is a myth, and it attacks the ordinary incentives of money and honor, which alone, as Malloch wrote, can secure the services of people of ability. And a third deeper cause is, again, a loss of confidence. The party, at least, has lost confidence in the political debates that have been familiar bread and butter issues since 1945, and it's lost confidence in its own relevance in those debates. It's lost confidence in the traditional conservative style of leadership, ability restrained by traditional moral and political systems. And it has lost confidence in the political relevance of what Kirk called the permanent things. And it's replaced these in the Conservative Party's rationale by a fundamentally liberal ethos of appetite gratification, an ethos that logically leads to the adoption of an only slightly more moderate progressivism. This is what has driven so many naturally conservative working class voters to Reform UK. So what Kirk said of the Liberals at the end of the 19th century applies to the Conservatives today. Quote, "From this time forward, they did not quite know what they believed, and the public detected their vacillation." I'm going to skip to a next section, which I hope you'll find interesting. Now, a culture, as Kirk and Scruton both recognise, along with Arnold Toynbee, Christopher Dawson and Eric Vogelin, is what grows around the shared cultus. Ultimately, religious sanction is the basis of sustainable order, and, as Kirk puts it, political problems at bottom are religious and moral problems. You may already have heard of what has been called the quiet revival of church-going and Christian spirituality among young people in the United Kingdom. The statistics are actually amazing. Church attendance has grown by 50% over the last 6 years. In 2018, just 4% of 18 to 24-year-olds said that they attended church at least monthly, 1 in 25 people. Today, this has risen to 16%. With young men increasing from 4% to 21%. 1 in 5 18 to 24-year-old men is now going to church regularly in the UK. This shouldn't surprise us. Two of the permanent things are Christian metaphysics and the family, which both pertain primarily to what Kirk calls order in the soul, moral order. Kirk argues that today's conservatives should be, quote, concerned first of all for the regeneration of spirit and character, with the perennial problem of the order of the soul, the restoration of the ethical understanding, and the religious sanction upon which any life worth living is founded. This is conservatism at its highest, he adds, but it cannot be accomplished as a deliberate program of social reform. And he warns, quoting Dawson, that treating religion as a kind of social tonic in order to extract a further degree of moral effort from the people will never work, because recovery of moral understanding cannot be merely a means to social restoration. It must be its own end, though it will produce social consequences, end quote. So it is good news for British culture in the sense that both Kirk and Scruton understood it, that this quiet revival is happening. The Bible Society's report, which is the report on the YouGov poll that discovered all of these amazing stats, offers a two-part explanation of this quiet revival. First, British culture was, until recently, hostile to Christianity, but it is now open to it. Indeed, in some British social circles, it now seems culturally desirable to be seen as a Christian. Generation Z are simply not interested in what Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens had to say. But second, they do feel a greater need for belonging than older generations do or did. But I think there's a third explanation. Our secular culture is rooted in a cult of impermanent things, and its fruits in public life are increasingly visible. Rapacious hedonism, runaway consumerism, addiction to external stimuli, polarization along racial lines, sexual libertinism, alienation, loneliness, the epidemic of mental illness, the rapid spread of transgenderism and other forms of transhumanism. Our intellectual culture may be pluralistic, but it is also metaphysically decadent in the sense that Kirk borrows from C.E.M. Joad. Decadence is the loss of an object in life. Well, God is a refuge, as he has always told us. And the quiet revival is in fact a wave of refugees from the seculum that is visibly morally disordered. This ought to be a gift to conservatives, who in politics have always been on the side of defending the secular interests of God's family, the church. So in practical politics, conservatives can increasingly, in our environment, be less shy than they have been about defending and advancing Christian views of social ills and social goods. And in political theory, we can more readily draw upon the riches of Christian theology and metaphysics, as we've heard at this conference. And we can build our fresh arguments for the permanent things, not dusty old arguments, but fresh arguments upon wisdom that is ancient but living, rather than on the same unstable secular metaphysics that has birthed so many enemies of the permanent things. So let us raise our voices, as Kirk writes, quoting George Gissing, for the old simple Christian rules, and do our best to get the educated by the ears. Belief in a transcendent order, or body of natural law which rules society as well as conscience, is the first of Kirk's canons of conservative thought. Quote, during the remainder of the 20th century, he writes, the principal endeavor of imaginative conservatives is likely to be resistance to the ideas of a total society through recovery of an order which will make the total state unnecessary and impracticable, end quote. It was once part of the purpose of universities, as we can see from St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica and other great texts, to impart ever-deepening knowledge of that order, of course, with open discussion and questioning and the liberal education approach. Now, conservatives might disagree on the prescriptive extent of this transcendent order. In Oakeshott's terms, there is both a low sense in which government is limited by the basic facts of life, and high sense in which subjects should be progressively conformed to that order by government. The latter, however, could lend itself to a version of precisely what Kirk warns us against, a total state in the form of integralism, for instance. But that debate is not urgent because currently universities, apart from the University of Hull, are not cultivating young people's intuitive understanding of the transcendent order at all. They are simply dismantling it and making them the next generation of enemies of the permanent things. On these permanent things, Kirk pays particular attention in this chapter to Malloch's principle that it is ability, not labour, that is the real producer of wealth. And one of the most important incentives to ability, Kirk adds, is the inheritance of property. This satisfies the instinct of bequest and simultaneously provides for saving and the accumulation of capital. In America's British culture, Kirk points out that the strong family has been an institution of restraint, life-giving restraint, and he adds that no-fault divorce nowadays is only one of the socially destructive assaults upon the traditional family that in the name of emancipation would make us all into orphans. Another of those socially destructive assaults is inheritance tax. Currently, the standard inheritance Currently, the standard inheritance tax rate in the United Kingdom is 40% on everything over £325,000. That's about $446,000. The threshold here at the federal level, I realize that there are state-level inheritance taxes in 15 states, I think, but at the federal level, the threshold is $13 million. Now, there are very specific ways to reduce this a little in the UK, but if your parents leave you and your brothers and sisters an estate worth just $686,000, however many of those siblings there are, the state will take $96,000. And if your parents give you more than £3,000, about $4,100 in 1 year, and they die within 7 years, that gift will also be taxed. There is a good conservative rationale for inheritance tax, but it cannot support thresholds that are this low or rates that are this high. This inheritance tax regime is a clear symptom of what Kirk calls ideas of a total society. It is economically dysfunctional, it is immoral, but it is also socially dysfunctional. It's a bread and butter debate, and Conservatives need to rediscover their permanent principles in it, re-incentivizing ability, easing problems in generational economics, defending the family unit, and renewing the combination of reverence with the spirit of self-reliance. The permanent truth that the family is the only stable basis of society can only be maintained if the property of the family is properly defended. It is the task of this generation of conservative intellectuals to arrest decadence by exposing the cult of impermanent things and restoring the sense of an object in life by making fresh cases for the permanent things, quote, affirming normality in the concerns of society, but avoiding what Kirk calls dusty answers. Of course, as everyone here knows, there are conferences like this every year, due in large part to the work of Professor Herker, Dr. Pitt, and the others who have helped organize this year's conference. We are, I think, doing quite well at running events, publishing on conservatives and conservatism, building our network, getting to know each other, having those important debates. But perhaps we could also enter academic debates on the conservative side of specific arguments in specific policy areas. Perhaps we could organize and coordinate ourselves better to reaffirm the permanent things in those same areas. The fact and value of social orders and classes, the fact that high culture is a common good, that equality of outcome is usually immoral and anyway futile, the need for both self-reliance and reverence, the vital principle of ability restrained by traditional moral and political systems, for the creation of wealth, and for the resurrection of political leadership and true statesmanship. Thank you.
Okay, so my paper is titled Man as a Territorial Animal in the Writings of Roger Scruton. If, as Aristotle said, man is a political animal, then he is also a territorial animal. Any polis has physical boundaries, and Aristotle spent some time on the politics talking about the best geographical environment for a city, its physical layout, and the size of its population. Modern philosophers have tended to abstract their concepts of the best city and its formation from considerations of its physical environment, scope, and size. But Roger Scruton resembled Aristotle in his attention to the concrete territorial character of the political community. Though he was concerned with the nation-state rather than the city-state, Scruton followed Aristotle in emphasizing the importance of citizens living together in the same place for a long time in order to form bonds of civic friendship. For much of the 19th and 20th centuries, conservatives were skeptical of the nation-state. They associated it with the centralization of power at the expense of localities. Advocates of the nation-state tended to be radical, seeking to displace traditional authorities. More recently, conservatives began to see the nation as a bulwark of national and local culture against rootless cosmopolitanism, economic globalization, and international political institutions. Scruton made an important contribution to the conservative appropriation of the nation-state as a force for conservation. And there are three themes of his defense of the contemporary nation-state concerning its territoriality that are worth our attention. First, that man is a territorial animal who seeks to build a common home with his neighbors. Second, that the jurisdiction of the nation-state is necessarily territorial. Subnational and transnational loyalties are a threat to it. And that is why, third, it is best for a nation to have a territorial religion. So, man is by nature a territorial creature, according to Scruton. We both adapt to our environment and shape it to our own purposes. Human beings have a natural love of shared place, manifesting itself politically in the nation-state. For Scruton, nationality, as distinct from nationalism, is a form of territorial attachment. He says it is also a proto-legislative arrangement that contains the seeds of sovereignty. The virtue by which we love our home, Scruton calls oikophilia. He explains the love that we have for our country in terms that we use to characterize our individual households. We settle down not just with our immediate family, but with neighbors and our broader community. Scruton says that for the English, home was an island of mine in an ocean of ours. Their country and their neighborhood had the same comfortable familiarity as their household. In settling, we put down roots and attach ourselves to the land instead of merely residing in a random place. Residing means living someplace without having made it our permanent home. We may have made a financial investment in our residence, but we are not morally and emotionally invested in it, nor do we have relations with our neighbors. Modern development is characterized, Scruton says, by individual plots scattered over a place that is no one's, instead of a community that is ours. Without a sense of possession, people will not take responsibility for the place they inhabit. And by detaching people from the land, Scruton says urbanization undermined the English sense of place and the very sense of what England is. Building a community entails building a shared environment with shared manners, architecture, and byways. In English, the word neighbor etymologically means one who builds nearby. Scruton says every building should be a fitting member of a community of neighbors. We want our homes to be beautiful, so it is natural to desire beautiful towns, which give rise to a shared aesthetic norms and a vernacular architecture. Shared aesthetic conventions give a place a sense of permanence. Scruton points to Gothic architecture, which can be found in churches, public buildings, and private homes as an example of a style that ties together a community aesthetically and enchants it. When land was enclosed in England, it was still kept open by common law rights of way that reconciled individual ownership with common settlement, so that byways would be continually shared. Hedges evolved into a living fence that keeps livestock in while beautifying the landscape and permitting neighbors passage over the land. To violate aesthetic norms is not just bad manners, but selfish and destructive of the shared aesthetic that makes our home beautiful and therefore destructive of community itself. We said that territorial attachment is a proto-legislative arrangement, according to Scruton, that gives rise to sovereignty. He says, theorists of the social contract write as though it presupposes only the first person singular of free rational choice. In fact, it presupposes a first person plural, in which the burdens of belonging have already been assumed. The formation of a nation with a government and laws presupposes the prior existence of a community with specific boundaries. Without a sense of shared membership in an already existing community, parties to a social contract would not be able to begin to consider how to govern themselves. Territorial settlement gives rise to political authority, which creates laws to govern the territory. The rule of law, in turn, facilitates trust among members of the nation, which makes it possible for people to view strangers as neighbors and fellow countrymen. In other words, the community that exists prior to the government forms the government, and then the government provides institutions and laws which strengthen and give further definition to the nation. Yeah, that doesn't count against my time, does it? There's a reciprocal relationship between the people who inhabit a territory and the state and laws they institute to govern themselves. The members of the nation must be committed both to the place they inhabit and the rules that govern them. They share responsibility to care for the observance of the rules that bind them together, holding each other and their government accountable to the law. Since they're based on shared adherence to impartial laws, unlike tribal or religious loyalties, national loyalties, Scruton says, can be multiple and can nest within each other without conflict because they're defined by territory. He says that one can be Scottish and British, or for that matter, Pakistani and British. And I quote, such examples illustrate the flexibility and openness of the national idea and the way in which local, tribal, religious, and ethnic loyalties can be co-opted to an ongoing project of nation building. The British experience therefore illustrates the way in which a composite national identity can be forged into a single jurisdiction, while also providing shelter to minorities who may as yet have no national loyalty at all, but whose children, it is hoped, will be brought up to acquire one. That's Scruton. It is precisely the solidity of the territorial jurisdiction that makes this possible, though. If the territorial jurisdiction were to be weakened, the nation's ability to nest or assimilate other loyalties would be called into question. National loyalty may fail to take root or may be undermined because of subnational tribal loyalty or transnational loyalty to an international governing body, whether political or religious. The value of territorial jurisdiction can be seen when it is contrasted with jurisdictions without acknowledged accountability to specific states. Scruton points out that national leaders tend to escape responsibility for government actions when they can outsource decision-making to transnational or international bodies. Such bodies lack accountability, either because they reject accountability to national jurisdictions or are remote enough to keep their operations obscure from outsiders. Transnational governance threatens the nation by undermining the accountability of nation-states to their peoples. Societies are naturally exclusive and assign rights and privileges to their members that they do not give to others. Rights in a nation-state are abstracted from considerations of religion or tribe. They treat citizens as equal members of the nation. The success of the nation-state depends on the displacement of bonds of clan and religion by bonds of law. But rights are only meaningful if there's an authority with a specific jurisdiction to enforce them. Universal rights are meaningless because there is no universal authority to enforce them. When specific rights are assigned to specific groups over specific resources and places, they will be better taken care of. Like Aristotle, Scruton says that we take better care of things that are ours when they are secure in our possession. He shows that specific legal rights to seas, rivers, and countryside help preserve them. When Britain and Denmark joined the EU, they had to give up jurisdiction over their territorial waters. Up to that point, they had conserved the common stock of fish in their territorial waters because the waters and the fish were theirs. But once those waters were open to all of Europe, they were exploited, Scruton says, destroying the fish stock of the North Sea and the English Channel. English law facilitates the formation of corporate persons at law to serve as trustees of public goods. The law does not require state permission to form trusts as it does in other European countries, so corporate persons have been formed to attend to any number of public causes. When businesses and local authorities polluted British rivers, anglers formed an Anglers Cooperative Association to bring collective litigation against polluters. By asserting their riparian rights as a corporate person, they helped ensure the rivers remained clean. The National Trust is another corporate person established in the late 19th century to acquire countryside and coastline to protect it from development. Eventually, it acquired country estates in order to preserve them too, precisely as a symbol of civilized settlement and making them publicly available in a way that they had not previously been. In each of these cases, public goods were preserved by the assignment of specific rights and duties to specific persons and groups over specific places in law. Their concreteness is a guarantee of their efficacy. Scruton believed that religion can threaten territorial jurisdiction by claiming to transcend it. Religious loyalty is based on loyalty to a creed rather than a tribe or territory. Members of a religion may be loyal to a universal jurisdiction instead of the territorial jurisdiction based in their nation. That, according to Scruton, was precisely the problem with England's relationship with the Roman Catholic Church. The Catholic Church claimed to have a universal jurisdiction whose head was a foreign prince. From the 12th century to the 16th, kings of England battled with popes over taxes, episcopal appointments, and whether the clergy were subject to royal or ecclesiastical courts. Tensions between the local territorial jurisdiction of the king and church in England and the universal jurisdiction of the Pope were only resolved by the Act of Supremacy in 1537. It brought jurisdiction over the country and the church together in one authority. But fighting between Protestants and Catholics continued for another century and a half. So when the Church of England consolidated its position, it consciously adopted a tolerant and flexible policy toward Protestants of various theological persuasions, although not, of course, toward Catholics. Scruton says that religion is created by man, and the Church of England is, in his words, a conscious artifact that served to domesticate religion. He says Anglicanism was based on something deeper than doctrine, namely a shared life together in a common home. Its use of the vernacular in liturgy and the translation of Scripture enriched and unified English culture, and the country church was perceived as a kind of home in which God dwelled among the English. He says that, and I quote, "Europe owes its greatness to the fact that the primary loyalties of the European people have been detached from religion and reattached to the land. Those who believe that the division of Europe into nations has been the primary cause of European wars should remember the devastating wars of religion that national loyalties finally brought to an end." So nations are more tolerant of difference than religions, according to Scruton. Nationalism, as distinct from national loyalty, is pernicious precisely because it has a religious intensity. It represents the pathology of national loyalty, not its normal condition. National loyalty has been delegitimated in part because we have mistaken it for its pathology, a pathology which has actually been quite rare. So for Scruton, our political nature is inescapably territorial and manifests itself in modern politics in the nation state. He rehabilitates the nation by describing it as a shared home rather than something based on ethnicity or language, though it may include those things. The nation accommodates foreigners who, by a process of assimilation, go from being strangers to becoming neighbors. That's why, he says, national loyalties can nest within one another without conflict. It is possible insofar as they have a shared commitment to a shared place and way of life in a specific territory with a specific jurisdiction. Attachment to the nation as a home may be reinforced by a national religion, but for Scruton, that loyalty should be attenuated so as not to conflict with national loyalty. The nation state should be conserved then because it is the best safeguard of particular cultures in the face of globalization.
Go ahead. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody who put this terrific program together. My name is John Grove. I'm going to be speaking, and hopefully he's just setting the table for a conversation about the relationship between intellectual conservatism and partisan movement conservatism in America. In his 1993 essay, Popular Conservatism, published in The Politics of Prudence, Russell Kirk placed hope in a natural conservative instinct that he identified in most Americans, an unlearned and unrefined sort of conservative tendency, able to identify well enough some of the social ills around him, skeptical of fanciful narratives that were spun by cable TV pundits, also skeptical of the promises and projects conceived by politicians, and desirous of the freedom to educate his children, to worship God, to contribute to his community. Indeed, Kirk saw at the outset of the Clinton presidency both political parties at least paying some sort of lip service to this popular conservatism of the average American. The big question, he noted at the time, was how this basic instinct would be educated and directed in the years to come. He said, conservatism is not going to become unpopular in America, so the question before us is not whether it will be supplanted by a new liberalism, but rather if a high degree of intelligence and imagination may be infused these next few years into this popular conservative yearning. Some of us, having labored in that vineyard for 4 decades, pray that the harvest may be sweeter than the grapes of wrath. Those last sentences, viewed now from 30 years on, I think have a rather melancholy ring to them. Now, there has always been a distinction between what the description of this conference calls the intellectual conservative tradition and partisan movement conservatism. A conservative tradition of, on the one hand, is a conservative tradition of thought about how the human being relates to his social and political surroundings. And on the other is an organized political movement promoting an agenda understood to be in some way, shape, or form an outgrowth of that understanding. The relationship between these is naturally fraught, given that the conservative intellectual tradition has generally held that conservatism does not correspond to any particular political program. A conservative political movement, then, must always walk a very fine line. A group of partisans may share a conservative temperament and seek to influence policy and government outcomes, generally guided by their conservative prudence. But it would have to guard very carefully against ideologizing itself and turning its policy aims into ends in themselves, and thus losing the entire thread of intellectual conservatism. Both Kirk and Scruton recognize the tension between the deeper intellectual conservatism and the partisan advocacy that has used the name conservatism. Neither certainly shied away from a degree of advocacy, but both also recognize that a key to the conservative understanding of the world is that certain social and cultural realities are outside the control of politics and are far more essential to a healthy social order. Thus, neither hesitated to criticize their side of the political aisle when it threatened those deeper values. Kirk favorably cited Eliot on this very matter, who argued that there must be a distinction between those who detach themselves in the pursuit of truth and those who are devoted to political advocacy, even as there ought to be linkages and continuity that allows conservative ideas to have an effect in the world. He warns equally, this is Kirk quoting Eliot in a letter to Kirk, he warns equally against the political theorist becoming a doctrinaire who dominates the man of action, and against a tradition in which political philosophy is formulated or recodified to suit the requirements and to justify the conduct of a ruling clique. In America, I would argue, at least since the Reagan presidency, the incessant struggle to control the levers of the central Leviathan state, and particularly the executive branch, has dominated the imagination of movement conservatives, with the result that the latter of the two dangers Eliot warned of, the tail has wagged the dog. Conservatism has come to mean what the Republican Party standard bearers say it is, defined and redefined based on the political objectives of the moment and of the men. This has taken many iterations, from the neoconservative crusaders for liberal democracy to libertarian-inflected Ayn Rand reading conservatives to today's populist national conservatives. All of these, I believe, have ideologized some aspect of the prudential conservative approach to politics, and all, accordingly, have sold a bill of goods to America's popular conservatives that Kirk appealed to, by promising that there is a clear political or policy solution to the evident dangers that they perceive to their traditional way of life. Not least of all, this brand of conservatism has systematically captured the minds and attentions of young people who have an instinctive conservative impulse, directing them away from cultural endeavors and toward the inanities of talk radio, then cable news, and now social media influencers and podcasters. Not all podcasters are bad, by the way. But, it has turned these young people, I think, toward what Kirk called the politics of passionate unreason. Not only has movement conservatism distracted adherents from cultural and societal goods, it has also distorted those very goods by viewing culture only through a political lens. Klaus Rinn has noted this tendency for a long time, and in 1996, he described it in terms that continue to ring true today. In recent years, Rinn observed, individuals known as conservatives have taken a greater interest in the state of the culture. In part, this development may be a sign of an awakening to the importance of thought and imagination. At the same time, it confirms and gives new impetus to the ideologization of American conservatism, in that the interest in the culture is often heavily slanted by the old fascination with political power. Issues of cultural decline are discussed as if the key to reversing the trend lay in the hands of politicians and their intellectual allies. Much of the present conservative interest in the culture, again, this is still Rinn, is due to a growing awareness of the political impact and propaganda potential of the mind and the imagination. It has also become politically opportune to bemoan cultural sleaze. Many right-leaning activists today also loudly declare that culture counts, but engage with culture explicitly on the same terms as Marxist radicals who saw culture as a contrived and controllable phenomenon that serves the interest of this or that political and economic group. Accordingly, they seem not to have imbibed much of the traditional conservative understanding of culture, recognizing the limits of political action and the limits of one's own moralistic pretensions. There are likely many culprits as to why movement conservatism became untethered from the politics of prudence, But one of them, I would argue, is that the imperative to win national power, and especially the presidency today, systematically cuts against a politics that, in the words of Scruton, starts at home. Scruton argued that a healthy politics is one that grows out of the habits and ways of life of a settled political community. It is an outgrowth of a pre-political social commitment to one another and the patterns that allow a people to share a particular place. This commitment to a shared home generates skepticism of an enterprising politics that would aim to remake society wholesale or always distract it with collective projects. Rather, it allows for the possibility of what Oakeshott called a civil association, aiming at the maintenance of social order, the administration of justice, and the flourishing of non-governmental authorities that pursue human goods that politics cannot provide. As I've argued elsewhere, in America, this sort of politics rooted in a commitment to a shared home has never been possible directly at the national level. New Yorkers, Hoosiers, Arkansans, Michiganders, and Californians simply do not share a place in any meaningful sense. Commitment to America as a whole, then, must come in either one of two ways: as a community of communities, in which one's sympathy to the nation comes channeled through a commitment to locality, or, as it usually has, through ideological abstraction. Contemporary politics, in what is now a continent-sized presidential plebiscitary democracy with mass instantaneous communication, precisely calls out the latter, ideological abstraction. It demands a politics conducted in language and symbols that cut across and marginalize locality and place. The same political memes, used in the traditional sense of that word and in the internet sense of that word, the same political memes must be able to appeal to people who precisely do not share a place or a way of life that emerges from a place. The issues to be discussed, the passions to be aroused, and the money to be donated all must therefore point far away from home. The citizen of a small Midwestern town must be made to care far more about what is happening in the streets of California, New York, Washington, Tel Aviv, or Tehran than what is in his backyard. And when political contestation does occur in his home, in his backyard, it will be undertaken in the language and the mindset of national ideological partisans rather than being worked out by the deliberation among neighbors. Insofar as movement conservatism has followed the incentives of this mass politics, incessantly focused on winning national elections, it has taken the popular instinct that Kirk identified and channeled it in the direction of personal grievance and collective power. And in doing so, it has cultivated among many conservatives the same kind of moral servility that Kenneth Minogue so astutely diagnosed among the modern liberal, who has channeled his moral instincts into political causes and away from responsibility and personal virtue. Many conservatives have become untethered, I think, from movement conservatives have become untethered from the insights of intellectual conservatives. Rather than struggle against this reality, I think it may be time to consider embracing the freedom that comes with it, declaring as much independence as possible from whatever happens to be going by the name conservative in Washington, D.C. In universities, classical schools, institutions devoted to learning and research, or in philanthropic activity, it may be time for a retrenchment, articulating, Kirkian and Scrutonian truths that are a challenge to and an indictment of all influential currents of today's mass politics, just as much as it was when it was developed and formulated in the 1950s. Such conservatives are not powerless, but their work at this moment may likely consist in sowing seeds, the harvest of which no one here will reap. A few ways that this approach may manifest itself. First, the traditional and intellectual conservative could direct more attention to people's homes, to the place where we are. The dollars of philanthropic organizations could be dedicated more to Middle America, building strong towns and communities rather than being funneled inevitably to DC endeavors. Second and relatedly, intellectual conservatives ought to emphasize the reality that the highest endeavors of human beings and the greatest ambitions of the human soul do not depend on big picture political outcomes, fighting against that servile attitude that I mentioned that holds that the only good we can do in life is to give ourselves over to a cause. As Scruton observed, the choice lies before us as it is lain before every human being in history to live well or badly, to be virtuous or vicious, to love or to hate. And this is an individual choice which depends on cultural conditions obliquely and which no other person can make in our stead. Third, organizations ostensibly devoted to educating for liberty, order, or responsibility must decide whether they seek to cultivate a deeper understanding of the world or if they seek to have temporary influence. Do conservative universities distinguish themselves by high standards and intellectual independence, or by being partisan canvassers and DC influence peddlers? Do we invite to our campuses great writers and thinkers and artists, or popular influencers who check the intellectual diversity box more by being provocative than by being profound? Fourth, when it does come to politics, we ought to take our cue from another great traditional conservative, Robert Nisbet, and prize as among the most important political goals the preservation or recovery of the functional autonomy of sources of authority outside the state, recognizing that with autonomy from politics comes a duty to devote an institution to its distinctive tasks and activities. We must fight for the autonomy and the duties of churches to minister to souls rather than preach quasi-political moralism, the autonomy and duties of private schools to put our children into conversation with the great tradition of humane letters, the autonomy and duty of universities to pursue higher learning, not aimed at influence but truth, cultivating what Scruton once called the virtue of irrelevance. Involved in this last point, we ought also to cultivate a relentlessly skeptical attitude toward central political plans to steel the minds of young conservatives against the seductive notion that as long as we are in charge, as long as the program tells us what we want to hear, then all the stuff about constitutionalism, limits, freedom, civil society, and human fallibility just don't count anymore. And on this point, no greater book, I think, is of relevance than Scruton's fantastic book, The Uses of Pessimism, which recounts the fallacies that all people are prone to, especially in positions of political power. For some time, of course, movement conservatism preached about these things, but they have all proved to be key stress tests that have largely been failed. To decline to expand the power of the state, to devolve serious authority to localities, to promote the freedom of civil society, even when it means giving up an opportunity to exert one's own power, to rile up supporters or to win more votes. These have proved to be too difficult a test for movement conservatives, both today and in the past. To the partisan activist, of course, all this sounds like suicide. Though I am not advocating that conservatives decline to vote for candidates worthy of it or stop opining about contemporary politics, only that they renounce an instinctive and automatic loyalty to the movement as it exists in D.C. To this claim of futility, to the resistance of the dominance of Washington, D.C. Politics, I can only point to Kirk's comment from 1956, also in relation to a commitment to decentralization and locality. There, he says, conservatives must not be afraid of the public's ridicule for the public's sake. Conservatives in our time must be prepared for the role of Don Quixote. Thank you.
To their critics, conservatives seem lost in the world, blindly groping for things that no longer exist or no longer matter. Forever on the wrong side of history, the conservative seeks a world now well lost, unable to see things either as they are or as they might be. Whatever else is true of the conservative, the liberal believes, he suffers from a lack of vision. It is true that the conservative never quite feels at home in the world. The great conservative thinkers of the past century recognized that while we live in the modern world, modernity itself has somehow distorted our vision of things. The conservative was in the modern world, but not of the modern world, and that world knew him not. Hegel wrote that philosophy is the attempt to make a home for ourselves in the world, thus suggesting that our natural state was a kind of homelessness. Weber concluded his analysis of the spirit of capitalism by noting that the mass cosmos of capitalist economic activity had become for us an iron cage. It made us inner-worldly ascetics who worked in the world with no love of it. These great 19th century thinkers drew attention to what would become a central theme of post-war conservatism. How had mankind become lost in the cosmos that it itself had built? What were the instruments of our displacement? And why could we no longer see clearly the path that would lead to our happiness? The great Canadian conservative, actually the only Canadian conservative, George Grant, observed that, quote, "Our present is like being lost in the wilderness, when every pine and rock and bay appears to us as both known and unknown, and therefore as uncertain pointers on the way back to human habitation. The sun is hidden by the cloud, and the usefulness of our ancient compasses has been put in question. Even what is beautiful, which for most men has been the pulley to lift themselves out of despair, has been made equivocal for us in both detail and definition. Like Odysseus, we are at sea, longing to return home, but unlike Odysseus, we have lost the knowledge and skills that would allow us to navigate by the unchanging stars. We are condemned to be adrift, never to return home, and so we respond by embracing the constant motion, the constant drift, allowing ourselves to be carried by currents we only dimly understand and cannot control. I suppose there are some persons who can learn to love that fate, but not the conservative. The conservative disposition emphasizes the act of seeing, a constant adjusting of vision that attempts to see things for what they truly are, and then to love them. The conservative knows that the world is not seen well when viewed through screens or from a distance, but instead closely and in person. Only at close range can we see a thing in its fullness and its essence, and only then can we lovingly attend to it. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed conservative is king. Joseph Pieper articulated this dynamic well in his wonderful little book, Only the Lover Sings. He wrote concerning a specific concept of the human person that happens only in the contemplating awareness of our world. Our loss of vision, he argued, connected to our loss of sight, or in other words, we no longer see the world for what it is. And this is in no small part due to the fact that our sight is occluded by overstimulation. Our restlessness and stress results from absorption and enslavement by practical goals and purposes that can only be amended by seeing things rightly. He wrote, "The capacity to receive the visible world with our own eyes is indeed an essential constitution of human nature. To see things is the first step toward that primordial and basic mental grasping of reality, which constitutes the essence of man as a spiritual being. Such seeing is also intimately connected to wonder and contemplation because beauty resides in complexity and detail. The greater the distance, the greater the need for simplification. Kirk believed that infinite complexity opened up only when viewed microscopically and not telescopically. While Kirk's life in Makasta may have seemed simple from a distance, it was remarkably rich and detailed and nuanced. In a word, complex. As a writer, husband and father, justice of the peace, neighbor, patriarch of a home of tremendous hospitality, leader of the conservative movement, Kirk's life not only demonstrated complexity, but the importance of affection. He defended the instinctual habit of human beings to love that which is nearest, and to which we are connected by birth, against those who would undercut those instincts. Kirk's love attached itself to his ancestral home in Makasta, which he described as a happy and kindly and cheerful place where he could most be himself. In Makasta, the old order could receive some patching and polishing, but only with an eye towards preservation and incremental improvement. It wore its poverty lightly, like a cloak, never having sold out to development. Kirk reminisced about walking along its unpaved roads, seeing a woman and her son working the potato fields as twilight descended, describing the scene as humane in the best way, and fearing for the ways in which society's improvers would never see its inherent goodness, nor would they have any interest in patching the tar paper shanty where the woman and her son lived in Mecosta County. Rather, the humanitarian improvers would, quote, prefer to rip down the shack, pack its inhabitants off to Detroit or Flint, put them into state-subsidized housing, find them a television set to keep them out of mischief and vagrant fancies. We know how Kirk felt about television. And set them to work on industrial production. The people who worked the earth were the salt of the earth, but not just salt, also light. The rustic and austere beauty of Mecosta mesmerized Kirk. He admired the place's simplicity and frugality and its world of silence. He intertwined Eliot's emphasis on permanent things with leading a life of decent independence in Mecosta, where he could marry for love and raise children. The ancestral home satisfied his deep urge to honor his patrimony by living in continuity with their land. It was only in Mecosta that he could feel a deep satisfaction, having joined past and present, and have no desire to change 1 square inch of this enchanted world. Kirk felt, quote, most content when planting little trees in Mecosta. To plant a tree in our age with the expectation of change commonly seems greater than the expectation of continuity is an act of faith. Also, it is an act of historical penance, he continued, restoring the fairness of the land. At Mecosta, where the heron flaps over the swamp and the beaver splashes in his pond, community and a sense of community are not dead. Kirk stressed not only loyalty to persons, but also a loyalty to places. The pull of Mecosta on his affections never ended. For no matter how far a man strays, it is well that his home should remain a place where his ancestors are buried. Meaning and action have to be connected to loyalty and dependence and continuity if they are to function coherently in human life. A crisis is reached when new modes of association can't provide the possibilities of action and meaning of the ones that they replace. Uprooted, we soon shrivel and die. This emphasis on rootedness, connecting to the specific and concrete gifts of time and place, celebrating life-affirming variety of those places, is taken up by Scruton as well. It was not enough to see life as a gift. Rather, true giftedness occurred in the transformation of existence into something higher than what it already was. Whether it's the raising of nature by grace, relationships by love, making by craft and skill, exchanging by gifts, or managing the necessities of life by gilding them, Scruton attended to the ways in which we change the world, and thus ourselves, through supererogatory acts that lift the ordinary into something extraordinary. We all try to turn the water of ourselves into wine. Scruton, in his essential I Drink, Therefore I Am, A Philosopher's Guide to Wine, and those who know me will not be surprised to know that's my favorite of Scruton's books. And the man was no dilettante. He knew his stuff. Advises, and I'm going to be quoting Scruton throughout here, and I was tempted to use my English accent to do that.
Go on.
And I ran it by Micah Watson at lunch, and he said, yeah, don't do that. It would be an insult to our guests and would also force us to relitigate the revolution. In that book, he advises that drinks that have a depressive effect, water, for example, should be taken in small doses and for medicinal purposes only. Wine should be imbibed in abundance, though not to excess, for not only does it make life bearable, it is accompanied by the good manners, uncomplicated affections, and serene thoughts that allow us not simply to see things as they are, but also in their potential. In that gauzy haze wherein perception and intelligence are clarified by love. Water may be everywhere, but people drink it only out of necessity, not for enjoyment. Wine is taken for enjoyment, and unlike water, which is always the same, wine connotes place and particularity. Scruton focused not on varietals, but on terroir, the distinctive features of the specific place from which a wine originates. Every grapevine differs from the vine that grows right next to it. The features of the soil, the elements of the climate, the way the sun itself hits each leaf, all result in distinctive grapes and all require focused attention. Only by blending do vintners come close to approximating something that is repeatable. In a world of commodification and standardization, corporations will blend all the distinctiveness out of the grapes and thus market varietals rather than terroir. And so you'll see on a bottle of wine the kind of grape. You won't see the place of its origin. But Scruton would have none of that. A great wine, he insisted, is a cultural achievement not available to Protestants, atheists, or believers in progress, since it depends on the survival of local gods. The key encounter is not between producer and consumer, but between man and soil. A wine can have a price anywhere, but value only if connected to a small, specific spot of named and hallowed earth. Let the multinational corporations mass produce their slipshod treacle that pays the price for being all the same everywhere by being memorable nowhere. And let Americans, quote, indulge their fantasies. Get ready for this one. Let Americans, quote, indulge their fantasies in burger bars and shopping malls and watch half-ton cubes of human flesh as they propel themselves on invisible and unguessable undercarriages from nowhere to nowhere, blessing with Whitman-esque largesse whatever is placed before their eyes, mouths, and nostrils, always smiling, always greeting, and yet with that sweet, sad loneliness that nothing really can cure. Nothing. Nothing, especially the copious amounts of beer that Americans consume. And Scruton's disdain for the muddy ecstasies of beer was matched only by his hatred of free trade, fast food, and feminism. Only something first connected can be elevated. Just as the branches must be connected to the vine if they are to bear fruit, so too we must be connected to our place if we are to ever flourish. Wine opens us to the features of our actual world. Namely, it provides a place in the things that grow with memory, so becoming a symbol of a living community in its will to endure. Wine, more than anything, gives us the peculiar flavor of a landscape and gives it a halo of significance that alone can preserve that place against progress and economic growth. He wrote, in everything necessary to human life, we should champion the local over the global. And in everything superfluous, we should allow the global to enjoy its empty triumph. Wine, unlike spirits, is truly flesh and blood. The skins of the grapes crushed and the juices flowing forth like blood from the broken body of the fruit, fermented and transformed from and by death into its new life. Thus, quote, the first sip of wine stirs as it makes its way downward, the rooted sense of my incarnation. Scruton argues that it is precisely this quality of wine, its fleshiness, the patience required for its development, the art of ripening and aging and fermenting and maturing, its capacity to open the self to the other, its ability to reveal the true world by demonstrating that we belong to it, that made it the central feature of the holy mysteries. Love is that liquor sweet and most divine, which my God feels as blood, but I as wine. Sola in vino veritas, Scruton claimed. All other drugs and spirits tell a lie. Wine alone tells the truth. Wine not only partakes in, but reveals the twofold movement by which love ascends and descends. It is both human project and divine gift. It is both patient craftsmanship and miraculous discovery. Wine is both eros and agape, and that is the reason why it plays a central role in Christian sacraments. It was while drinking a bottle of local rosé in Lebanon during its civil war when Scruton claims a great change came over my thinking. He observed the Sisters of Charity carefully nurturing each person who had been planted in this unpromising soil of Lebanon into the fullness of life. They accomplished this by answering through their deeds two essential questions. You have been given much, but what have you given in return? And if you have given nothing, how will you atone for it? This is the act of descending love, of agape, which not only accepts the cup as a gift, but even more so the promise of forgiveness and redemption that it contains. But the offer of forgiveness is not an escape from judgment. Just as wine can become a poison when drunk to excess, so our cravings and desires can get the best of us and prevent us from accepting the good gift of life and place on offer. The poison in our hearts, resentment, envy, anger, which all result in the will to destroy, must be cleansed from our system by the healing power that comes from the true vine, whose Father is the gardener. If judgment, then the possibility of redemption and the hope that which inhabits the soil in death will once again rise to new life. We're ready for questions.
He did 10. I got to go. Thank you guys for the panel. It was fantastic. This is a question for Mr. Grove, although I'm happy to take answer from anybody else. Mr. Grove, I couldn't agree more with what you said over here.
Yep.
About the need for intellectual conservatism to perhaps take a step back from the rat race of day-to-day politics. However, as somebody who does find himself working in local politics, I have to ask, what advice would you have for somebody who wants to apply the lessons that everybody in this room, holds to be true about what it means to truly be a conservative to day-to-day politics and to for somebody trying to reintegrate the lessons of intellectual conservatism into the movement as such?
Basically what I said before, which was the recultivation of a skeptical politics, a politics skeptical of planning and cognizant of what it cannot accomplish. I think right now the dynamic that goes on in a lot of the big conservative conferences and discussion is that conservatives were only were only interested in principles of limited government and limits because they made some sort of practical coalition with libertarians, and that those are libertarian principles, and that if the conservative could really have their way, then right, all of the beautiful things that we know we like, we can sort of grab hold of them and just make them so through the same kinds of political policy choices that the left tries to do for their objectives. And so in that, I think the traditional conservatism is it articulates the reasons why conservatives believe those things, and they weren't libertarian reasons at all, right? They were deeply embedded into the way the conservative understands the human being and how social life works, how culture is formed. And so that would be the number one thing, I think, is that I think a lot of movement conservatism, whenever a prospect of a certain political victory has come before their eyes, they immediately sort of lose sight of those limits of what they can do. And we can do anything. We can make a Middle East country a liberal democracy. We can any sort of cultural issue in the United States. We can solve it with the right policy choices. And I think that would be the number one thing I would say.
Thank you. Hey, I got the mic. All right. This is a question for Chris. I was curious to hear more about, you were talking about the movement of younger folks in the UK going back to church. What do we know about, they're going back to church. What do we know about their beliefs? Are they Orthodox? Is this more of a therapeutic Christianity, like they just need the therapy of church? Are they serious about it? I'm just curious. Is it substantively going back to church, or is it more superficial?
What we know is that the denominations into which young people are overwhelmingly going are the traditional liturgical and theologically orthodox ones. So chiefly the Church of England, as you'd expect, but that's because you're starting from such a higher baseline, but also the Roman Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, and about 11% of them go to Pentecostal churches. They're not going to Methodist churches, and they're not going to liberal churches. Now, when asked to give the primary reason for why they're going back to churches or why they're exploring Christianity, Generation Z's top answer is different from millennials' answer. So the answer that millennials give is a sense of the love of God. Now, that may be because my generation now has children, and so there's a sense that there's a lot to be grateful for. Most of Generation Z don't yet have children. The top reason they give is that they're looking for truth. I don't know anything more about their beliefs than that, but they believe that they will find truth in traditional churches, in Anglicanism, in Roman Catholicism, and in Eastern Orthodoxy, which is quite unusual in the UK. There's not a big Eastern Orthodox community.
Hi, my name's Trent. Jeff, I didn't quite understand your joke/comment about Protestants not having local affections, or it just went over my head. Could you? I know jokes aren't funny if you have to explain them, but could you could you break that down for
We
me?
can promise to laugh
Break it
again.
down for you. Well, first of all, I was quoting Scruton there. Where is it? That's a direct quote from Scruton, where he says it's not available to Protestants, atheists, the enjoyment of wine. You'd have to ask him, which means you're going to have to do that on the other side of the grave.
Okay, understood.
I will say, I thought it was funny. In part because I just like taking little digs at my Protestant friends. But it probably has something to do with the sacramental nature of wine.
Bracy, I really appreciated your commentary today about and you brought up, of course, about planning in towns, and then John, you had mentioned about locality, and my conundrum with locality is, which I think Jeff brought up from Scruton's comments, is that you're going from nowhere to nowhere in so many places in this country that we've sold out and said everything is the same. So how is it you can have loyalty to a locality which is exactly the same in one town to the next? You have the same institutions, you have the same restaurants, the same stores, the same everything, really. It seems like anything of locality has been sort of shipped off into other places. And Jeff, of course, quoting from Scruton, I think, very much talks and laments that. How is it that we can recover this sense of locality and love for a local place when so much of locality is being abandoned?
Yeah, I have. So we were actually just talking briefly before the panel. I live in Front Royal, where Christendom is, and John's from Luray, which is about 35 minutes away. And it's really beautiful there. So one thing I think that can be a source of local attachment is the physical beauty of the environment, right? I mean, here it would be the rapids in Grand Rapids. So that's one thing. Second thing, I mean, part of it is just that it's ours, right? And so, to some extent, it doesn't matter if it's somewhat similar or if even very similar to other places. If you live there long enough, it's yours and you'll love it because it's yours. And then the third thing I would say, and I think this is harder because we're so mobile today, But just being in the same place for a long, long time and having friends that you've known for a long, long time. I've lived in the DC area for a quarter of a century now, and I have friends from college. We all went to school in Ohio, but half a dozen of my best friends ended up in the DC area. And we've had over 30 years of continual friendship. And there are places that whenever I go up to DC, I'm like, oh, I remember going out here with this group of friends, or and so on. So to me, I know this is very unfashionable to say about Washington, D.C. I love Washington, D.C. because I have all these memories there and all these people that I've known for a long time there. So I think that's available basically anywhere.
Somebody mentioned yesterday Burke's line that in order to love your country must be made lovely. Same thing goes. In order to get people to care about places, you have to create places worth caring about. Most of these places aren't worth caring about. They're slapped together. So it's no wonder young people leave them. They're soulless places. And that's part of the idea, right? And in an egalitarian society, you want people sufficiently displaced and uprooted that you can relocate them anywhere. They can follow the flow of capital wherever it goes. There is hope. I think one of the great developments of the last, you know better than I do, the last 10, 15 years is the failure of the suburban shopping mall. That is really a hopeful development. People hate those things now. And the strip malls that, line 20, if you're here in Grand Rapids, you're going up and down 28th Street. Every city in America has a 28th Street. And it's hopelessly depressing. But increasingly, every city in America has a downtown Grand Rapids, right? They've done sensible, reasonable development of their city cores. And they've made them much more interesting places. And, to use Booker T. Washington's line, put down your bucket where you are. They've made them places that are more likely places where people are going to put down their buckets. And they'll stay. But I agree. Like a lot of these cities and places, they're so monolithic, they're so dull, they're so uninteresting. They're invitations to flee. But I think that I think that the life has grown through the cracks in the asphalt. I think people are sick of that kind of stuff. I see when I drive around, I see strip malls closing down all over the place. It brings joy to my heart. And we haven't had the demolition of them yet. That's unfortunate. I'm waiting for them to get plowed under and something beautiful put in their place. Human beings want beauty, right? They hate being surrounded by traffic. They hate ugly things.
Thank you, gentlemen. But I guess this is kind of a question to Professor Bersnak and Mr. Grove. I guess what would be the way to respond to, at least I've come in contact with what I would say is kind of a false conservatism. It's trying to conserve. They're saying, well, this is what we've done, but we should conserve it. And the examples that I would give are kind of a harmless example would be someone who would say, death to foreign cars. We support what's in America. Well, only Chrysler makes minivans now. And they're pretty terrible. So if you want a good minivan, you have to buy a car that is not made in America. And that's an issue for a family. And so that, or one that I guess I've also come in contact with, the conservative argument that you should be supporting, especially the Republican argument that you should be supporting Israel in a lot of their things that are occurring in the Middle East, including, this is something that I found apparently, that Mossad engaged in a psychological campaign where they started turning on computers to play pornography in Palestine as a psychological warfare against Hamas, which I find morally reprehensible. And so I was kind of wondering, but some people argue, well, you'd need to support Israel because the conservative thing to do. So I was just wondering what would be your response to that.
Well, My family drives a Chrysler minivan. Other than some weird thing that the door always pops back open, it's done pretty well actually. So I don't know. Buy Chrysler. No, I'm not quite sure on that one. I mean, I would say foreign policy stuff. My view on foreign policy stuff, at least, is that that's a good example of what I had in mind. Is that I think there's been this sense that what the Republican Party has supported sort of just gets weaved into what it means to be conservative. And so that there's this sort of just very natural outgrowth that if you're a conservative, this much, that must be what your views are on specific foreign policy issues. And those are the sorts of things that are right. Those are questions of strategic statecraft that I don't think any particular answer flows from the sort of core conservative insights and principles. They're more questions of practicality and geopolitical strategy that the United States has to do. But we have had a tendency to sort of moralize those sorts of questions, and I think that's where our Middle East policy has been incredibly moralized, such that we don't have very reasonable conversations about it, even regardless of what position you want to take. Our conversations are very odd. We have involved in that too is this strange like evangelical views on Israel that I don't really quite understand, but they've also gotten weaved into what conservatism is in some way, because evangelicals are the big Republican voting bloc. So I don't know, like, how do you respond to it? I guess just, I mean, I deconstruct it. I mean, that's a really bad word for this, but I mean, I guess, I don't know exactly how to respond, but I would say that's generally my view, as I think the imperative to take this particular position on everything as the conservative position. There's lots of holes one can poke in that shows that it's really not always directly applicable.
If I may quickly, I mean, we're in a moral obligation to agree with people who do stuff like that, right? I mean, you're not obligated to participate in that. If you find it morally objectionable, say that you find it morally objectionable.
So I also have a question for you, John. I wonder if the kind of separatism you're arguing for on sort of the intellectual conservative side doesn't play into many of the criticisms of the NatCons in the first place, which is that intellectual conservatives, Buckleyite conservatives, or Reagan conservatives don't know what time it is. They're kind of out of touch. They've sort of ceded and lost a lot over the last couple decades. So how would you respond or counsel this kind of separatism? And would you just disagree with their premise, or say, yeah, there may be something to that, but you're on a sinking ship and you'd rather not be on your sinking ship for when it, founder. So anyway, I wonder if you could just address it. Maybe I mischaracterize what you're saying, but it seems to me as more of like a separatism, we're going to go our separate ways. And so if you could comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I think that gets into, the big discussion, so I can probably stall for
2 minutes.
I probably stall for about 2 minutes. No, I think part of it is, I think there's a sense in which I think for a lot of the populist national conservatives, they've seen things go very poorly, and so they've assumed from that the forces of the left have sort of, I'll say this because in one sense it's true, but in another sense it's not, have sort of been victorious in the sense that they have planned it all out, and they managed to put their plan in action, and it worked out just exactly the way they wanted, because it certainly hasn't gone the way we wanted. And I don't think that's exactly right, because that ends up sort of ceding to left-wing ideology, left-wing ideologues, principles about how cultures, how societies, how civil orders change, and that is by planners who have some sort of idea, who get the right power and push the right buttons, and they manage to get exactly what they want. So I've argued this in writing somewhere, that if you were to go back to the 60s and talk to the radicals in the 60s, they would have had a lot of what they wanted was not very good, but they wouldn't have had exactly what it is here, right? We're talking about who's in favor of free speech right now, right? Free speech is now, right, a conservative principle, right? That was one of the rallying cries of the '60s radicals. So in a lot of ways, they lost the thread, and a lot of it comes down to the Scruton quote that I think Dan mentioned, right? It's very easy to break things, or it's very easy to lose things, and it's very hard to build them. And so I think ultimately, I think the traditional conservative should view the last 50 years or so as not so much that the left-wing ideologue managed to plan it and succeed, so much as they managed to break things very, very easily. And we all know that that's easy for them to do, and things are now quite broken. The problem is that we don't want to break things; we want to build them. And so I think a lot of the national conservatives, when they use this sort of language that if you're not being sort of robustly grasping of the levers of power like the left is, then you won't win the way they have. I think it sort of distorts that question, right? We're trying to build something, and unfortunately, building is a lot more difficult than breaking it and tearing it down, and that's just a reality.
I have a question about place and the beautification of places. Very much in favor of beautifying places. The thing about beautiful places, though, the great thing is that people want to live there. And sometimes the mixed bag thing is that people want to live there. So I live in Holland, Michigan, which is just down the road, and it's a lovely town, walkable right on Lake Michigan, wonderful, hospitable people, great schools, all of those things. And a couple generations ago, for example, a young Dutch immigrant who worked in a tool and die shop could buy a reasonably priced house on a corner lot with a wife who didn't work and raise 5 children there very comfortably. Today, that same house, 6 children, sorry. And today, people who work as faculty members at the local college are kind of priced out of houses that are similarly valued. And there was an influx of people who moved to Holland, for example, during COVID and the rise of remote work. And there seems to be a kind of commodification even of these beautified places. So what can we do? Is there anything we can do to prevent these beautiful and beautifying places from just simply becoming one more commodity in which people who can't afford them don't get to participate?
Build more of them.
Yeah, I would say that's what I would say.
I think the answer is build more of them.
Yeah. Yes. And get Eric to do it for you. Eric Boots.
Yeah, it's I don't know enough about why housing prices are what they are, or I know there are different theories as to why there are housing shortages and so forth. There's still plenty of land available. It shouldn't be that hard to build more properties if you want to build more properties. But I do think there is something to be said for other towns, other cities, small cities and so forth, looking at Holland and saying, geez, how can we make our place look more like that? So I have a friend. I have a friend who lives in Canada, and he lives in a town that's a little smaller than Holland, but not that much smaller than Holland. And it has it has the potential to be a really beautiful town. It's right on Georgian Bay. It's got this river running right through town, right to the waterfront. It's got an old downtown with buildings that are already functional or could be restored. I've been going there for I don't know how long and visiting my friend. He comes to Holland and he's like, why can't my town be like this? I said, well, your town can. Everything is there that you need. What you don't have in your town are people with the means for capital investment who stuck there. And so if you look at Grand Rapids or if you look at Holland, what made these cities work is that the people who made money in these towns stayed in these towns. And they kept investing capital back in these places. Right? They stayed connected with their workers. They stayed connected with their communities. They kept reinvesting stuff. They didn't leave. And so they maintain that deep commitment to the town. So I said to my friend, you've got everything you need. Like, for one thing, do what Holland did and turn those streets into one-way streets, build out your sidewalks. So now that you've got places where people can sit outside, they got some nice cafes and stuff there. They don't have the political will to do it. And they don't have the people there who are willing to make the capital investment to make it work. So I think, so what do? Right? You make the incremental improvements where you can. And then over time, these are multi-generational projects, right? And I think you have to think of them that way. And you just make them incrementally better. I went to college here in Grand Rapids. I can tell you this area of Grand Rapids when I was in college was a hellhole. You did not come down here. There was nothing down here. It was not interesting. It was ugly. And local people who had a commitment to this town, they came down here and they saw what was going on and they invested in the downtown area here and they turned it into something beautiful and attractive. So I think, figuring out how you can keep encouraging people to keep their capital invested in the place where they're from is a key part of that.
Another great panel. This has been, everybody, thank you. This has been a marvelous couple of days together. And I just have a couple of housekeeping comments, and then we've got two concluding remarks. They'll be short. I know this has been a wonderful day, but a long day. 4 sessions, 16 speakers. You've all earned your glass of wine. Well, excepting the Protestants. Okay. That's what I've learned. I don't know why, but I do know why. But anyway, that was all terrific. Well, an event like this doesn't happen without support of friends and donors. And I want to just take a minute to thank our sponsors who helped make this conference possible. Mr. Michael Maybach, Paul and Jackie Klein, Hexel, both Michael and Paul were here for a good part of the conference, which was really nice. It's always nice when the people that support it actually come in and benefit from it themselves, and they're both really excited. Elliot Spoon, who's from Lansing and a good friend of the center. Of course, the Ludovica University. Friends, please extend our gratitude and thanks to our friends in Budapest. It's made a real big difference for your involvement, not only your human resources, your human participation, obviously, but the resources that you put into it. The Gerald Ford Presidential Foundation, Jeff, your team is amazing. This is a great facility. Everybody's been commenting how much they've enjoyed it, so thanks for having us a success. I want to take just a quick minute to sort of end where I began, by thanking the Russell Kirk Center team, which worked really hard to make this happen. I want to thank, of course, Cecilia for supporting me through all this, and also for that delightful surprise this morning, for Emily Corwin for planning this event and for just executing another amazing, successful Kirk Center event. So thank you, Emily. I have the entire team working the beat here for all of you to hopefully make things smooth. Ashley, Daryl, and Chris Marlink, the interns and fellows, Brian, Jesse, Russell, and Maria. Maria from Barcelona, as I mentioned earlier, was a marvel to me. You're like a stealth bomber photographer. I mean, you're the Panther photographer. You just so easily and confidently move, and you're gonna have some great pictures, guys. Real up close for your portfolios. Thanks, and you can thank Maria for it. And Daryl and I really benefited from this in a very practical way because, we've been given a terrific map for developing programs and themes and resources for our new School of Conservative Studies. So just a lot of good, I think, is going to come from this in that way as well. And also, the last couple of years, I've been kind of working with students and formally teaching this pairing, Kirk and Scruton, and I was founded at work with students, and once again, pairing Kirk and Scruton just works. There's just some educational magic that happens with pairing those two, and unlocks a lot of wonderful thought and conversation. So I hope you all enjoyed that, and I would like I hope that conversation continues moving forward. Now, Jeff and I had opening comments yesterday, so we've seated the final comments to our co-conspirators in organizing this event, Daniel Pitt and Franz Horscher. So we'll let you guys close. Dan?
I'll leave the boss with the final comments. I would like to associate myself with all of the thanks that Jeff gave, and thank you to everybody. One thing that a couple of things came out of this conference, and this is the fourth time that Ferenc and I have done it, and we've done it with multiple partners, and this has been the biggest and the most enjoyable of them all. And it gave me a thought of Walter Baggott's idea of conservatism of enjoyment. And I think that is something that has come across, that we can enjoy ourselves and we can find it enjoyable. My wife is expecting our fourth child. She would have been here. She said, thank you. That's wonderful. So I said to Roger when I was having my first child, I was a student of his then, and Fisher, who was here, he was here earlier, who was a student of his, and we were both having children. Actually, we all the way at the same time. It's slightly odd because he's in America and I'm here, but we keep doing it. And he said, it is conservatives, they enjoy themselves. And then he gave me that type of little smile afterwards. But one thing that you may have kept noticing, that many of us kept referring to Roger as Sir Roger. And I wanted to tell you why he got his knighthood, because this is really important. He got it for contributions to philosophy, yes, but not just for philosophy. It was through his going behind the Iron Curtain, a proper warrior against communism. He would go behind the Iron Curtain, he was smuggling books, he would give underground lectures, and he was beat up, he was arrested, and he was deported as an undesirable person. And that, don't you want that as your status? You're an undesirable person from communism. You think, wonderful. So that's why he's got that Sir in front of his name, and it's so important. And I think it came out of here for me is the culture of affirmation. There is so much to affirm, so much to love. There is so much of happiness and joy we can bring in the world. And so I think there's great prospects for Anglo-American conservatism in the tradition of Kirk and Scruton. But even if there isn't, even if we're on the losing side, I would rather lose with Kirk and Scruton than win with Lenin. Thank you.
That's a note on which I can very easily take up and go on. Yes, first of all, let me thank again for all the hosts and the guests as well. I think this is an audience which is exceptional, and we never saw anything like that. So I was under a cultural shock. Let me put it this way. You know, we Hungarians are regarded as a nation of tragedies and conflicts and lost battles, but this one did not look like that, and that's why I had this cultural shock, and now I would like to return this. So let us finish it on some more serious stuff, and that's what was introduced by then mentioning the name of Lenin. I would like to share some of the motives why I am here and why I think this is such an important thing for me, particularly. That's what I can give an account of. I was born in 1964 in Budapest, which is not Bucharest, and that was 8 years after 1956, when there was a revolution, and my father lost his job, and my mother was kicked out from the university. So that was an event which made Hungarians think about the future. And I was brought up in a family which was partly Catholic, partly Protestant. And the sister who came up to give us the education came up secretly because, the religious orders were demolished. So that was the situation. And therefore, it was quite unimaginable that there could be a world of freedom in that part of the world. And so it was quite funny to see that in the 1980s, there came a group of young people, and they pretended to live a life as if it was a free world. And that's what they did. And now they are in power. They have been in power for 15 years. That small group of people who decided that they should behave like serious people who take rules seriously and who want to behave as if it was a free world. And I think that's a strategy that works. At least that's my experience in that part of the world. And the second aspect that I would like to share with you is that personal example is crucial. I have taught for 24 years in the Catholic University in Hungary, which was re-established after 1990. So when the Iron Curtain fell down, and the father who was responsible for our department was a pious. He belonged to the pious order, and he taught during the communist days as well in a secondary school, but not on the university level. And we invited him to come and be our father there. And I tell this story because for me the most interesting discussion of this whole 2 days was that I met these two interns in one of the breaks, interns of the Kirk Center, and they came to me and they were quite articulate. They asked me whether they could sit down and talk to me. And I said that, well, yeah, of course, come and we started to talk, and they had very good and well-defined aims. One of them wants to become a lawyer, the other one wants to become an academic, and they know where to go for that and what they want to do with that. And I think that this is an expression that they are in a good environment. One of them at Hillsdale, the other one at Ave Maria College. So I think that shows that indeed education has function and can be successful and can lead young people forward. And the way to do that, I think, is through personal example. And that's why I wanted to recall this Father Jelenic, who taught us younger colleagues of his, that in fact it's very rarely in the classroom that things will happen. It's always outside of the classroom, in summer camps and excursions and Saturdays like this one. You could spend the day with very different things, but for some reason you came here, and I think it turned out to be quite a fruitful discussion. And these two guys, Scruton and Kirk, of course they were, talented people. You need to have talent, but a further dimension to it is that they lived a life which is an example. And it's, of course, it has its difficulties, because they can become, icons like rock stars or whoever, or they can become like Lenin or Marx, references for our talks, but without any real substance to it. On the other hand, they can become, inspiration for us, and can show that even if they seem to have lost their games, they actually won it. And to do that, you have to be talented, as I mentioned. You have to work a lot during 6 days a week, and then have your Sabbath. You have the time of leisure. And that's the two sides of it, the vita activa and the vita contemplativa that needs to be done. And if the two things come together, that's when your life become meaningful. And I think that's an example that one can learn from them, and that's something which I think inspire me here particularly. And I hope that you share that experience with me, and let us go for our own aims, because this sort of inspiration is important for us, because it gives meaning for our life. Meaningfulness is the important things, not to win, but to have a meaningful life. Thank you very much for all the